Morning arrived slowly, creeping over the cliffs of Greywatch. The house itself seemed to have exhaled, finally at peace after the night of the storm. The sea no longer raged against the land. It whispered now, a soft, murmuring apology for its past fury. A delicate mist clung to the world, wrapping its pale fingers around the silent trees. The gulls were quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. I stood at the open window of the study, Elias Hart, though I hardly recognized myself. My coat was a loose shroud over my shoulders, my hair was a mess, and my eyes, though hollow, felt strangely calm. Sleep had been a stranger since dawn, yet exhaustion was nowhere to be found. Instead, a profound stillness had settled deep within me. On the desk lay the letter, the very one that had once bound Eloan and Alaric in a tragic promise. But now it was blank. The ink, with all its sorrow and yearning, had vanished completely, leaving the paper clean and pure. I reached out, my fingers tracing the empty surface, half expecting it to speak again, to whisper its secrets. It remained silent. Yet, I could have sworn I felt a flicker of warmth under my touch, like the ghost of a heartbeat. The house around me was utterly still. No piano notes drifted through the halls, no spectral whispers, no groaning floorboards. For the first time since I'd arrived, Greywatch felt empty, truly and completely empty. But this emptiness wasn't cold or foreboding. It was a gentle void, the kind that follows a long-awaited peace. I turned from the window, and the air carried a faint, familiar scent, salt and roses, Eloan's fragrance. It lingered not as a haunting presence, but as the soft echo of a goodbye. I found myself drawn to the front parlor, where the grand piano stood, its lid open. The dust that had once coated it was gone. In the morning light, the wood gleamed like polished amber. I let my hand drift across the keys, and a single one sang out. A clear, soft note that hung in the air for a moment before gracefully fading. A small smile touched my lips. "I hear you," I whispered to the quiet room. And then, for the very first time, I played. My fingers, hesitant at first, found a melody. A tune that felt both new and ancient, something I might have heard in a dream, or perhaps hummed by a ghost long gone. The music rose and fell, as gentle and rhythmic as the tide. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was not empty, but kind. Leaving the piano, I stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was beginning to blush with gold at the edges. The mist was thinning, revealing the deep, dark blue of the sea below. The cliffs, slick with morning dew, shone in the emerging light. From this vantage point, I could see the small village church, its roof still damaged from the storm, but standing firm. And beyond it, the vast expanse of water glittered as if sprinkled with diamonds. Then something caught my eye, a faint shimmer out on the horizon. At first I dismissed it as sunlight playing tricks on the waves. But it wasn't flickering randomly, it was moving. A steady golden light, floating purposefully closer to the shore. I frowned. A boat? It was far too early for the fishermen, and this light was different. It was too pure, too constant to be a mere reflection or the sweeping beam of the lighthouse. It glowed with an inner fire, like a lantern carried by unseen hands. A strange compulsion seized me. I went back inside, grabbed my own lantern and coat, and left the house without a second thought. The morning air was cool and damp against my skin. The tall grass brushed against my boots as I followed the narrow path down toward the cliffs, my breath puffing out in small white clouds. Each step felt guided, as though an invisible companion walked just ahead, patiently clearing the fog from my path. The wind began to carry a new sound, the slow, rhythmic dip and pull of oars cutting through the water. The shimmering light grew brighter, more defined. I reached the edge of the cliff, where the stone stairway descended into the rock face. The steps were slick, but the path was familiar now. I started down carefully, my hand braced against the cold, damp stone wall. Halfway down, the fog suddenly thickened, swallowing the world in a soft gray blanket. All I could hear was the steady, eternal heartbeat of the sea against the rocks below. At the base of the cliff, The water itself seemed to glow with a faint blue light. And there, half hidden by the swirling mist, was the boat. A single lantern hung from its bow, its golden light spilling across the dark waves. I froze. A figure sat within the boat, a tall man with dark hair, still wet from the sea, wearing a long, heavy coat. His face was pale, but his expression was one of absolute calm. His eyes, when they looked up at me, were bright and kind. For a long moment the world stood still. I couldn't find my voice. Finally, I managed a soft, breathless word. Alaric. A gentle smile graced his lips. You kept your word. I swallowed, my throat tight. You were free. I saw it happen. I was, Alaric confirmed, his voice like the calm sea itself. But freedom is not the same as peace. The sea released me, but I could not leave without her. Ilawan, I whispered, the name a prayer on my lips. Alaric nodded slowly. She waits where the tide meets the light, but she cannot cross until I do. The waves lapped softly against the hull of the small boat. The lantern flame flickered, its reflection dancing in the still water. I took a step closer, my boots sinking slightly into the wet sand. Then what do you need me to do? Nothing, Alaric said, that faint, grateful smile returning. You have already done more than any man could, but I would ask for one thing. Tell her I'm ready. My throat constricted with emotion. I looked past him toward the horizon where the fog was now glowing with an ethereal brilliance, a silver light spreading across the sea, like a dawn breaking beneath the waves. She'll hear you herself, I said softly, my voice filled with a certainty I couldn't explain. As if in response, a warm, strange wind rose from the water. It carried that impossible scent of salt and roses, stronger now than ever before. The mist all around the cliffs began to glow, infused with that silvery light. And from the very heart of that luminous haze, a faint figure began to resolve. A woman, radiant and pale, her silver hair flowing behind her like threads of moonlight. Ilawan. Her eyes, shining with an otherworldly light, found the boat. A single word escaped her lips, a sound of pure love and relief. Alaric. He stood in the boat then, his hand reaching out across the water toward her, though she still floated some distance away. Ilawan. The space between them crackled with an energy 1,000 years in the making. Their names hung in the air, a final perfect chord in a song of sorrow and devotion. They were two halves of a single soul, separated by a vengeful sea and a cruel fate, now finally finding their way back to one another. The light grew brighter and brighter, a blinding, beautiful white that enveloped them both. The mist, the boat, the two lovers, they dissolved into the dawn, becoming one with the light, the sea, and the sky. I stood alone on the shore, the empty lantern still in my hand as the first true rays of the morning sun broke over the horizon, washing the world in warmth and gold. The ghosts of Greywatch were gone, and in their place, there was only peace. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Greywatch. It's been a story close to my heart, and sharing it with you has been a real privilege. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world. Until next time, take care. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elias, sensing the shift, took a step back, giving the two spirits their space. Even the waves, a constant, tireless force, seemed to pause their endless rhythm. Ilawan drifted closer to Alaric, her ethereal light painting shimmers across the water's surface. Her voice was a soft whisper, barely disturbing the stillness. You came back? Alaric's reply was firm, laced with a love that had defied death itself. I told you I would. Even death couldn't stop a promise. A laugh escaped her, a delicate, beautiful sound, like glass wind chimes stirred by a gentle breeze. You always did argue with the sea. He smiled, a warm, genuine expression that lit up his ghostly form. And she finally listened, but only because someone else made her remember mercy. His gaze shifted, turning briefly toward Elias, who stood silently on the shore. He carried what we could not. Elowyn's eyes followed his, her light falling upon Elias. Her voice was filled with a profound gratitude. You brought us both home. For that, we owe you peace. Elias shook his head slowly, the sand shifting beneath his feet. He felt no burden, only the quiet honor of being a witness. You owe me nothing, I was only meant to listen. She smiled, and her light seemed to warm like the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. Then keep listening, Elias. The sea will still whisper, but it will no longer cry. Alaric held out his hand to her, a silent invitation. It's time. As their fingers touched, the light around Elowen flared, a soft yet brilliant nova. In that same instant, the lantern resting in Alaric's spectral boat burst into a radiance so intense it filled the entire cove, piercing through the dense fog. Elias instinctively shielded his eyes, the sheer brightness overwhelming. Then, the sound of the world changed. The relentless pull and crash of the waves ceased, replaced by a single deep, resonant note. It was like a sigh, one that had been held in for years, finally released into the quiet air. The light, carrying the two intertwined spirits, began to rise, ascending from the water's surface. When Elias could look again, the boat was gone. The fog, once a thick, suffocating blanket, was thinning, drifting away in delicate ribbon-like tendrils. The sea lay before him, utterly calm, its surface as smooth and reflective as polished glass. High above, two faint shapes shimmered for a fleeting moment against the emerging sky. One golden, one silver, rising together, finally free. He stood there for a long time, the wind brushing gently past him, a soft caress against his skin. He felt no sadness, no grief, only a profound, all-encompassing peace. He turned and began the climb back up the long, winding stone stair. The spectral light followed him halfway, a silent, grateful companion, before fading as he reached the top. When he stood once more before the imposing facade of Greywatch Manor, the house no longer looked lonely or foreboding. Its windows, once dark and empty, now reflected the golden light of the morning sun. The ivy clinging to its stone walls stirred gently in the breeze, as if the house itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Inside, the oppressive gloom was gone. The rooms were bright, filled with natural light pouring through the clean windows. The air smelled fresh, a pleasant mix of old wood polish and clean sea air. The grand piano sat quietly in its usual spot, but it no longer felt like a monument to sorrow. It was simply waiting. Elias placed his own lantern on a nearby table and sat at the piano once more. His hands rested on the ivory keys, no longer trembling. He began to play the same tune as before, the one born from the sea's grief. But this time, it flowed from his fingers with effortless grace. There was no hesitation, no fear. The melody was gentle, tender, a song of farewell, of gratitude, of peace finally found. The music drifted through the open balcony doors, carried by the wind. It traveled across the cliffs down to the shore and out over the water. The ocean seemed to listen, its calm surface swaying in a gentle, perfect rhythm with the song. When the final note faded into the quiet morning, Elias sat perfectly still. Sunlight streamed across the polished floorboards, warming the room. He closed his eyes and smiled. That night, when the fog returned to the coast, it was different. It came not as a haunting shroud of sorrow, but as a soft, familiar friend. The moonlight caught on the mist, turning it a beautiful, shimmering silver white. And from somewhere far out beyond the cliffs, a faint light glowed on the horizon. Two small, distant stars moving together in a slow, celestial dance over the sea. Elias stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool and crisp, the night profoundly quiet. He looked out at the 2 points of light. "Goodbye," he whispered into the stillness. "Both of you." The wind answered him with a soft sigh, carrying the faint, sweet scent of roses. He stood there for a long time, watching until the stars finally faded into the gentle blush of morning. When he turned back into the house, Greywatch felt truly alive again. It wasn't haunted, it wasn't empty. it was simply home. In the days and weeks that followed, Elias poured his energy into the old manor. He repaired the crumbling sections of the stone walls, cleared the overgrown gardens, and, in a final act of transformation, he reopened the tall, iron front gates. The villagers, who had once whispered fearful stories about the house on the cliff, began to visit. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. They brought gifts of fresh bread, shared stories, and filled the once silent halls with the sound of laughter. Children, their parents' fears forgotten, ran gleefully through the corridors where silence had once reigned supreme. Greywatch was no longer a place of sorrow. It became a place of kindness, a sanctuary, a place where light lived again. Sometimes on quiet nights, when the wind blew just right from the sea, Elias would hear it. Faint music, drifting through the halls, the soft melodic hum of a woman and the low, warm laugh of a man carried on the sea breeze. And when he heard it, he never felt afraid. He would simply smile to himself, a quiet acknowledgement of the peace he helped create. "I hear you," he would whisper, and the sea, gentle now, would always whisper back. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more tales from the quiet corners of the world. Your support means everything. We'll see you next time.